the small and medium enterprises are a vital cog in the gear of the Indian economy. It won't be far-fetched to say that at the heart of India's growth aspirations lie the SME sector. However, things have not been easy for the sector. First hit by demonetization, GST proved to be disruptive for the sector. What can budget and what should Budget 2018 do for this vital part of our economy? To discuss this and more, we have with us today Dr. Ajay Sahai, Director General and CEO of FIEO, Priyajit Ghosh, Partner KPMG India, MSME, Partner Deloitte India, and Mr. Rajive Chawla, Chairman IamSME of India. So, Dr. Sahai, if I can come to you first, what is your assessment of where the Indian economy stands at the moment?
In fact, you have rightly pointed out there has been considerable disruption in the economy because of demonetization and then the initial hiccups in the GST. But I think where we stand today, we can definitely take off from this point. The worst is over. We have already bottomed out. The good thing is that even global trade is looking quite promising after 2016. 2017 is expected to have grown by around 3.4%. This year, we are expecting it around close to 4%. The commodity prices are moving up, metal prices are moving up, crude has already moved substantially. So that has provided good environment for exports and even for the manufacturing. But let us also keep in mind that when it comes to the MSME, most of them are in the traditional sectors of manufacturing, where over a period of time we are losing our competitiveness. This has been borne out by few studies also. And therefore, when we talk about the SMEs, I think we have to look into some of the key issues of skilling, productivity, innovation in these sectors. And government needs to provide some kind of a supportive regime to the MSME, because you have rightly pointed out that if we look at the GST, and with the reverse charge mechanism coming into the place, of course, that has been deferred till 31st of March. That has not provided the support which SMEs was looking for.
Right. Priyajit, what's your assessment?
So if you look at the SME sector, more than revenue, they contribute towards the employment, right? And they are the ones who are going to be the last mile connectivity to the customers, right? So in that sense, it's quite an important sector, so to speak. If you really look at overall economy, the big ones are really doing better, but the smaller ones are getting cornered as we kind of change the structure more often than not, right? But the path seems to be correct, but it's going to be a long course. And yesterday I attended a meeting where there are Chamber of Commerce from some parts of Delhi. They elaborated their problem. The problem is more in terms of knowing the structure, knowing the day-to-day issues. And those are not very complicated issues, surprisingly. Those are not related to GST, and as we speak for larger ones, right? So those are very fundamental issues. Those were very small issues. And in the meeting, most of the issues got clarified. So we need that last bit or the last touch. And that's where the story is going to be complete. Otherwise, I think we are going more towards a reactionary kind of approach, where we say anti-profiteering last budget, evasion this budget. Prior to that, this last council meeting, prior to that possibly rate in some council meetings. So we are kind of doing it in steps. But for the smaller ones and the exporters, these are the two big areas that we need to focus for a stabilized and a sustained growth.
Right. Mr. Mani, where do you think we are headed in terms of the economy?
I'll just add to what both of them said. When we talk of the SME, the primary characteristic of Indian SMEs that strikes me is that majority of them are in B2B business. Unlike many other countries, we do not have too many SME startups which are in B2C. Right. Now, when SMEs are in B2B business, typically what happens is that to a very large extent, what they do and how they sell is determined by the buyer. Because the buyer is a large enterprise which has got deep pockets, which has got established processes. And to a very large extent, when we had the GST rollout, there was no specific consideration given to SMEs in terms of a better compliance or an easier compliance. except that there was a carve out in respect of composition dealers, whose limit was increased in every GST Council meeting. So we started with 50 lakhs, went to 75, went to 1 crore, finally went to 1.5 crores. The area of concern that I see as emerging now is that in yesterday's GST Council meeting, the finance minister was very categorical in saying that the composition scheme overall does not seem to have worked the way it should have worked.
Right.
Because while there are something like 7 million people who are registered, the contribution of taxes is very low.
307 crores.
Yeah, and therefore there is a fear that people may not be paying the right taxes. Now, SMEs should be very cautious of this approach, because at some point of time, if there are investigations that are conducted, the SMEs won't have the wherewithal and the bandwidth to handle those investigations, because they are typically smaller players. So to some extent, to my mind, what we could see going forward is that the compliance burden of the SMEs shifts to the larger players, people who buy from them. Now that would ensure that the SMEs are absolved of that compliance.
Right.
The larger players in any case have the compliance infrastructure, so makes it easier and makes it good for both.
Right. Mr. Chawla, you are a part of one of the most active chambers of commerce for SMEs. What is it that you pick up from the other members, and what is your own assessment on the economy per se?
In fact, last 18 months have been very turbulent for everyone here, and especially for the MSMEs. In fact, it's not about SMEs. I mean, there is one M before that as well. Right. So it is MSMEs. So I would say in the MSMEs also there's a bifurcation. The micro and the small are more affected adversely, while those in the medium, those who are more organized, they've seen good times in 18 months. So these 18 months in the MSME have been, by and large, if I bifurcate, those who were underprepared or unprepared, caught off guard through the digitalization and also GST, and those who were prepared enough in the medium-sized, and those who were already using ERPs or good tools available. So I've seen people in the medium sector really capturing market, growing individually. If I may mention, my own growth has been more than 30% in the last 1 year, and I have actually ridden the good waves. While by and large the micro and the small sector, which was not prepared, that is really reeling under a lot of pressure. This is one. And therefore, I believe that this is the time when the government should actually be looking at the micro and the small segment. I agree that government took its own time in correcting the GST provisions over the last 7-8 months. And we've been highlighting some of these challenges to the government. And in every GST Council meeting, they have been taking some steps. So I would say about 80-85% of the issues are resolved as on date. I mean, it's a big statement, but I'm making that maybe up to 90% of the SME related, the rate related and the other challenges have been resolved. And yet, the last 10% which are there, and the new e-way bill that will now come into effect on 1st of February, let us see how these tough challenges this MSME sector once again faces. So I think this turbulence is not yet over. While it could be eased because of some rate corrections and some procedural corrections, and yet at the grassroots, people are facing huge problem in the MSME sector. They don't have the manpower to file GST returns properly, or to they don't even have access to good internet connections. Even the GST servers are often down. So this 31st of December was a Sunday and the New Year time, and I saw the entire accounts people working overtime on a Sunday trying to file returns. Some of the last dates were 31st of December, and then the government also extending at the last moments. So I think, as on date, India has seen two major disruptions in the last 18 months, and MSME sector is the most affected in this, because, and especially those who were underprepared or unprepared. And so 2018, I agree with Mr. Ajay Sahai when he says that things look like we've already bottomed out. But let me also mention that we have ultimately missed the tide, the global growth tide. It's for the first time in decades that globally the average growth rate is more than 3%. Right. And while India's growth rate is actually dipped. So we have not made hay when the sun was actually shining globally. So our exports and other things are down. So, but then let's see, I hope we'll recover and let's see what measures the government's now take.
Right. So one of the key aspects of every budget is the excise bit, where we keenly look at, whether excise will go up for some items or it will go down. With GST, that portion is completely gone. So in that sense, has budget 2018 lost its sheen?
No, of course, if you look at the expectation, the budget, that is relatively subdued, because the major chunk of the indirect tax has gone into the GST. But it's still on the direct tax front, and when it comes to the inverted duty structure on the customs or even on the imports which are happening through the FTA routes, budget has many issues to address for the industry. Let us also keep in mind that, of course, we are relying very heavily on the larger scale sector. But the way the US has reduced the corporate rate in one go from 35% to 21%, on the one hand, the US subsidiaries in India are exploring the possibility of moving back to the US. Secondly, a lot of pharmaceutical companies who have their major trade with the US, they are also exploring the possibility to go to the US. And that will definitely affect the investment in the country. So I personally feel that let us put more hopes on the micro, small and medium industries, provide them an ecosystem where they can flourish, look into the issues which are affecting them. And I personally feel that since their contribution to the export sector is much more than when we talk about the larger scale sector, we have to provide little hand holding to them. When it comes to the specific issue, we are looking towards reduction in the interest rate, but the way inflation is right now, and primarily the food inflation, I don't expect RBI to cut the interest rate, and particularly because the crude prices are also moving up. Now, if the SMEs has to borrow at such a high interest rate, they are becoming a little uncompetitive. Secondly, let us not ride high on the wage arbitrage that has moved away from us. The country in Sri Lanka or Bangladesh, they are more competitive than us, and primarily because we hardly have the skilling in the labor sector. The per unit cost of Indian wages is much high as compared to the other countries. And this is something where I personally feel that the government should look into. We have huge national skill development missions program which are working, but I don't think there's much connectivity of those programs with the industry. And therefore, when on the one hand industry talks about lack of skilled worker, the government is coming with the figure that millions of workers has been trained. So that bridge also needs to be narrowed down.
Right. Priyajit?
No, I think the budget, yes and no both, because if you really look at budget, we used to have this big bang announcement on 28th of February, and then from 12 o'clock it was made effective for that matter. Now, if you look at the proposals which are going to be in under GST regime, I would say, not just GST, those are going to be one for customs, and those are going to be more in procedural nature, because you really can't do much about the peak duty rate. Now coming to GST, all those provisions that we have kind of lived with for the last couple of months, and the last time that we did amendment or the law was enacted was some 9 months back, right? After that, there's no change in the law that has been done. All the changes that has been done is mostly around the procedure. So you really have the law, and then you have the procedure. The procedure has to be in line with the law. You can't really change the law. Many a times we've had discussion with the council members, we've had discussion with the policymakers. They say that, look, we can't do anything middle of the year because the law is what it is. And if the law needs to change, the parliament has to say okay to it. So this is an opportunity to kind of come to the speed or let's suppose be at that level where all the changes that you wanted to make in the law, because there's a learning process as we have implemented for the last 9 months, you would do that. So for example, matching, we often talked about matching, right? But as per law, matching is necessary. So you really want to get away with that because you feel that it's not the right move to do, you need to amend the law. So all of those changes are going to be there. But I don't think it's going to be as exciting as used to be in the budget days, because of the fact that the GST Council has historically been proven to be a very porous body. You have tweets coming out as the meeting goes on.
Right.
And in this case, of course, the council has to say yes to it. That's number one. But the biggest part is every state has to make a similar change in the law. Right? So center cannot do it at its own end, except for the IGST part, where it is going to do some changes which may be effective. But then you would have noticed in yesterday's finance minister's speech that he made that those changes are, in terms of rate, is going to be effective from a particular day.
January
so that's
25th.
what is going to happen in all the legal changes, unlike whatever that we had in the past. So yes, some bit of a sheen being lost, but this is going to be the first amendment after the GST has been enrolled. So there is going to be a big bang changes. And the broad counters would be known, but the devil is going to lie in detail, right? So devil is going to lie in the detail, which means you look at the word and figure out whether they've got it right or not before you actually implement.
Right. I mean, just following up on what you had mentioned right now, the FM actually talked about some sort of amendment, I think, at the part when he was talking about the composition scheme.
Yeah.
He talked about some form of amendment, and he was talking about how SGST and CGST are mirror laws.
Yeah.
So do you think he would take something like this up on a budget, or?
It's a good forum, right? So if you really go into a little more detail, the composition scheme, one of the biggest problem of composition scheme is that you can't really sell interstate. The second problem is in the world of today, which is electronic world, right? If you want to sell your product on a B2C basis over an internet or an electronic platform, the scheme is not available to you. Now that's something which is written there in the law. Now FM cannot do anything at this point in time, but the budget is going to be the right time to make an amendment, and then state can make a similar amendment. So they'll put it up before the council as an in-principle decision on a big ticket item, and then they will do an amendment on all those places. So it's going to be a good opportunity to fill up a lot of loopholes, and also to incorporate what have we learned for the last couple of months. So yes, so it's going to be one of the, I would say, most sought after announcement, which is really going to be effective in the last word, but not at the time which is where it's going to announce. So you'll still have some people, do some bit of a thing to say that, yeah, let me do it now, or let me wait for some more time because I know this is how it's going to shape up.
Right. Mr. Mani, what do you think?
I think this is going to be a very, very significant budget. I don't think it is going to be lackluster in any way for a few reasons. The first is, in budget earlier we used to have quite a few rate changes.
Right.
Now if you look at indirect tax rate changes, in any case in the last 5-6 years they had tapered down, because excise had come to a certain level, majority of products at 12.5. Service tax had settled at 15. So in the last few years the rate changes in budgets had in any case become minimal, and that is what is not going to happen in this budget. But except the rate change part, everything else that we have been seeing in budgets during the normal years is going to happen. And to my mind, this budget is going to be even more important than some of the earlier budgets. One reason is because this budget is going to culminate into all the activities which the GST Council has done with around a dozen meetings after GST was introduced. So yesterday's meeting was the Silver Jubilee meeting of the GST
Right.
Council, so it was the 25th meeting. Of these 25, there are 11 meetings which have happened after GST was introduced. Many of the decisions taken in those meetings require a legislative amendment. The legislative amendments are required in the CGST Act and IGST Act, which is to be done by Parliament. It is required in the SGST Act, which is to be done by each state. And only when the Parliament amends the CGST and IGST Act can, when the states present their budgets in the month of March, can they go ahead and make those amendments. And there are lots and lots of them which are already agreed and already decided, which have to be incorporated. When they do that incorporation, we have to wait and watch. Are they incorporating the change exactly, precisely the way it was announced after the GST Council meeting, or with the benefit of hindsight, in the last 2-3 months, are there some further changes? Similarly, during the last 2 months, there has been a lot of action other than the GST Council, because there was a law committee which was formed. There were industry sectoral committees formed for 18 different sectors. Very recently, there was a mega industry, a captains of industry, a forum which was made. All of these people have been suggesting changes to the government.
Okay.
We have not seen those changes coming on board. Now, the budget is the right time for all of those changes also to come on board, keeping in mind that the last 6 months experience of dealing with GST has also taught the lawmakers, the tax authorities and the government a lot, because to be fair to the government, they also did not have the experience of introducing GST. So this government has not introduced GST in some other country, and then they have come back and they have said, hey, let's do GST for India. So if we have to give them the benefit of that experience, which they have had in the last 6 months, the budget is the right time for them to make all those changes. And when I'm saying make all those changes, first is to announce those changes, introduce the legislative amendments. During the speech that happens after budget and the debate that happens, ensure that these changes are carried forth. It is very good that we are having budget on 1st of Feb instead of 28th Feb, because once Parliament agrees on this, many of the states where their budget sessions start during the month of March will start moving the amendments to the SGST law. And therefore, hopefully by 1st of April, many of the decisions taken will already get implemented. Many decisions taken which have been debated within the government circles will also see the light of the day. So to my mind, therefore, that when we have a legislative change of the magnitude of GST, and when we have a budget which follows immediately 6 months after that, it's going to be a very busy budget with lots and lots of changes in indirect tax. Customs changes, of course, are going to happen, but in customs also, over the last 5 years, we have seen very few changes in customs. This year, to that extent, the changes could be in respect of those customs activities which are impacted by GST.
Right.
So there could be a lot of consequential changes in customs. But even if we keep that aside, there are several changes that I would expect to see in budget, and therefore it's going to be a very interesting budget to watch out for.
Right. Mr. Chawla.
Well, this is going to be the second last budget of this government before the next general elections due next year. I believe that this is going to be a very tightrope budget. It's actually a balancing act budget. That's what I'm expecting. And there are a couple of reasons why I say this. The major changes that the government has done in the last 18 months, demonetization and introduction of GST, the results of that financially are still to be seen. And it's up and down. It's euphoria as well as downturn. So there's a bit of uncertainty in how much collections would actually make, whether composite scheme government would like to continue with or do away with, whether relief that they've provided at the micro level, small level, whether it's being properly used or misused. So those things need to be seen, the impact has to be seen. Second are the international oil prices that we see are rising. The government, which was having a great honeymoon with international oil prices and were easy on the current deficit, now is the time when it's going to be very challenging. Interestingly, the industry also is now demanding that oil should also be in the GST net. And Centre always said that they would discuss with state governments and would like to do it. I doubt if they would now like to do it because the revenue there is under pressure. So so I see this budget would try to do a lot of balancing act because the government is not very sure about how much collections would bring in by GST. On the other hand, government would definitely now like to go back into high investment mode. They've always been talking about that. And so the part A of the budget that they allocate to various ministries for infrastructure, agriculture, etc., I think their government would definitely like to put in more budget and would like to invest more in infrastructure and other purchases and other ideas to give a boost to the economy, the demand side from the government. While on the part B, because excise rate changes are now over, service tax rate changes are over, so that is now taken care by the GST Council. Those rates are already there, and I doubt if there would be any change hereafter, at least till the budget. So there, government at the most would tinker with something with customs or income tax. For income tax as well, I don't see anything happening this year. And so let's wait for that good announcement next year, just before the general elections. So, let me also mention that in the fiscal deficit front, we are once again very tight. And already we've passed about 90% of our spendings for this year. Let me also mention one very important thing at this stage. We hardly discuss the utilization of what was announced in the last year's budget. What was announced, for example, in the last budget, some allocation to a ministry. By the end of the year, we are once again looking at the new figures that the government would announce, rather than analyzing the utilization of the limits or the allocations given last year. And the strong point which I would like to raise at this stage is that in the Ministry of MSMEs, and today's discussion is also hovering around MSMEs, most of these subsidy schemes running for the MSMEs are still to take off in this financial year. So starting 1st of April this year, till date, and we are sitting in January 2018, most of these subsidy schemes which were traditionally given to the MSME sector, for which there is allocation in the last budget, let us say a scheme called CLCSS, Credit Linked Capital Subsidy Scheme, a scheme for lean manufacturing competitiveness program, or a performance and credit rating, or tech up scheme, that is energy efficiency. So many of these subsidies which are traditionally in the run by Ministry of MSME, for which there is a proper allocation of budget, those schemes are closed for the last 9 months. And we are sitting in January, the 10th month. And when those schemes would revise and whether those schemes would actually come back, by then, by the time this financial year would be over and a new budget is just a few days away. So my point that I'm making is that while it's great to announce huge allocations to various ministries, it is also extremely important for us to see how last allocations and announcements were utilized. And for that extent, sometimes I keep my fingers crossed. Announcements sometimes may be huge, sound very good, but back in the field, whether those would actually translate into subsidy schemes or benefits coming to the MSME sector or pure lip service, that is still to be seen.
Right. We're completely out of time, but one last question to all of you. If you were the FM, what are 2 things that you would do in this budget to ensure that SMEs get some relief or they're back on the growth path?
I think first of all, I would put the focus of the budget on the job creation. Any industry which is creating a job needs to be provided support, and therefore there has to be linkage between job creation, production or job creation and export. Secondly, I would like to create a huge corpus for the innovation, because India is something seriously lacking in these fields. Whatever innovation we are talking about are basically on the IT platform, which is basically, you can say it's you're clubbing the operator on the platform. The real innovation in manufacturing not happening.
Right. Priyajit, quickly.
I would focus more on skill development, because skill is going to be one of the biggest areas which is going to help us in long run. And in the short run, I would want to make the compliance really simple, do a back-end and analytics rather than asking the analytics to be done by the taxpayer and worry about that whether the compliance done by his supplier has been correct or not. So self-compliance and more focus on skill development.
Mr. Mani.
I would say that from an SME perspective, what they would love to see is that they should be permitted to focus on their business, and the compliance for SMEs should be completely moved to the larger entities with whom they deal with. Now, SMEs in any case are small. They have problems in respect of skills, in terms of people, in terms of money, and therefore there is no point in burdening them with more and more compliance. And the best thing to do is to shift this entirely to the large entities that they deal with, so that the SMEs are free to focus on their main business.
I would focus on availability of credit and resources to the MSME sector if they were to actually grow. In the past, government has announced some schemes like collateral-free loans up to 2 crore at the grassroots. Stand Up India scheme or such schemes are not showing the real effect. So one is how to make credit facilities easily available, accessible by the MSMEs. I think I would focus there, and I would tell the banks that they should be actually implementing some of these things. Second is that I would focus on developmental subsidies, technology-based subsidies, the CLCSS schemes, the revival of those schemes, and would ensure that the MSME sector in manufacturing as well as in services also strengthens itself, and to that extent government support is extremely critical.
So clearly a lot to look forward in budget 2018. However, we will also have to look at the fine print. What the industry and SMEs want, clearly it seems, are around jobs, focus on innovation, skills, making compliance easier, credit, and ensuring that schemes do not just get lip service and they are actually implemented. Thank you, gentlemen, for talking to us, and we look forward to budget 2018.